Welcome to step 13. And in this step, we're going to create role and a role binding for a group. Previously, you might remember in step 12, we created a role and role binding for a particular user, Dick Tracy. Now we're going to do it for a group in which Dick Tracy is a member. So let's take a look at the role definition. And you can see that in this case, we're going to create a role. It's going to be in the namespace devs, and the role's name is going to be simple pod developer. And the rules that will apply to this role is that a user or group that assumes this role will be able to create, get, or list pods. Okay? And friendly reminder, the reason we can do this assignment to Dick Tracy is that when we created the user Dick Tracy, who was magic user back here, is that in the declaration for the key, for the TLS key, we assigned Dick Tracy to the groups dev, devs, and tech leads, and that was embedded within the Dick Tracy key, those permissions. So let's go and let's apply the role simple dev role. Here we go, and you can see there it is. We've gotten the output we want. Now let's take a look at the role binding. And the role binding is saying, okay, we have a role binding, and it's in the namespace devs, which, by the way, is where the role we made previously lives. And we're going to call this role binding simple pod developers. And it's going to be a group, whereas before we made a user, now we're going to be a group, and the group is going to be devs. This group will apply to the group devs, which we declared way early on when we made the TLS key, as you can see up here. All right, and so it's going to bind, the role binding is going to bind to the role simple pod developer, and simple pod developer was defined up here. So there you go. Okay, so let me go back and find out where I was. Okay, let me go. Yep. Okay, we have to apply the role binding. So let me do that. I'm going to apply the role binding. Okay, good. Now, let's switch back to the Dick Tracy context. I'll do that by clicking here. You can see use context. I'm using Dick Tracy, who is also in an environmental variable, magic user. And now, let's try to create a pod. And as you can see, we could create the pod because now the role binding is applied to a group in which Dick Tracy is a member. And let's do get pods. And you can see the pod is up and running. But wait, there's a problem. Gee, we named this pod pinger DK. And previously, when we created a pod as a administrator in a prior step, we also used the name pinger DK. But there's a rule in Kubernetes that pods cannot have the same name. So how did this happen? Well, the trick is to look at the namespace allocation. So let's go back to being the kubeadmin user. We're going to switch context. And now I've switched context back to kubeadmin. And again, I'm over here. Take a look at the bottom of your screen. And now let's go to get pods. And if you look at get pods, what you're seeing is that pinger-dk lives in the namespace dev, but pinger-dk also lives in the namespace test. Now, these are not the same pod. These are two distinct pods running in two distinct namespaces. So there you go. You've completed the scenario. You've completed the scenario. So I hope you found this useful and keep coming back for some more Katacoda lessons.